Good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to visit Northampton, my first time to come to Northampton, and my honor and pleasure to give a talk at this Learning Global conference today. As Caroline introduced me, I'm a specialist in comparative higher education, originally from South Korea. I have lived, studied, and worked in London and Paris for 18 years and traveled to 21 countries for work. And I have been at Brunel for the last 8 years, slightly more than 8 years. And I have been privileged as a minority to gain various experiences and intercultural insights during that period. And I've been teaching only postgraduate students in MA and doctoral programs at Brunel, where 2/3 of them are international. And it was only this year that I got involved in teaching first-year undergraduate students. And it was a fascinating experience. As an international academic working in British higher education, I have become increasingly puzzled by the two separate policies and cultures promoted in British universities. One is widening participation in higher education, and the other, internationalization. I found myself caught in the interface between the two, especially this year when I was teaching the first-year undergraduate students for the first time at Brunel. And my talk today derives from my initial inquiries of the two cultures in UK higher education. And teaching the undergraduate students really helped me to think about the nexus between the international and multicultural dimensions of higher education. And most of the first year's undergraduate students I met at Brunel when teaching the BA Contemporary Education course this year are the beneficiaries of widening participation in higher education in Britain. There was no international student in the BA student cohort this year, and all of them, except one native English student, have immigrant family backgrounds, ranging from Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, West Indies, to Somalia and other mixed African backgrounds. Among them, 3 students are wearing hijab, and there are only 2 boys, both have Pakistani backgrounds. And my surface impression of this student cohort is that they are coming from diverse backgrounds, at least in terms of their ethnic cultures of origin. However, when I got to know them better, I found them surprisingly similar in terms of their manner, the way they speak and write, and the level of academic engagement. I thought this group of students may tell us certain characteristics of local young Brits in the region. And there is only one native English student in my BA class, and she said to me during a tutorial meeting that she's from Surrey, and the students in her class in Surrey were all homogeneous English. She meant that in terms of English ethnic cultural background. And it is her first time to have BME classmates, black and minority ethnic classmates, or live with the international students in the same hall of residence. The existing literature on widening participation in higher education reports that many students from working class backgrounds are left feeling alienated by the predominantly middle class culture of higher education, excluded from their university peers or marginalized from their home communities once they have adopted the norms and characteristics of the university environment. However, such general assumptions can be reversed in certain university contexts, as in the case of my BA class students at Brunel. The conventional majority identity becomes a minority, and the minority group becomes the majority in the BA group at Brunel. On top of that, the interaction between me as an international academic and this new British student cohort needs to be taken into consideration, which is different from the conventional approach and analysis of interculturality in higher education. So against these long backgrounds, my talk will cover the 3 themes. First, I will discuss internationalization as marketization and widening participation as a social engineering for neoliberal knowledge economy. And second, I will offer a critique of multicultural insularity in British higher education, the coexistence of 2 cultures on campus entailed by multi-monoculturalism, One is the diverse international student and staff cohort, and the other is the local minority cohort, often identified with immobile Black and minority ethnic students as new breeds. Third, I will offer my analysis of academic mobility entwined with a new type of knowledge creation in higher education. And I will offer some suggestions for global learning and interculturality. There is much talk and writing about the expansion and internationalization, even the globalization of higher education. But to what extent is there really a global university? I don't know why this doesn't come up all together. And for whom is it global? And what does globalization, or perhaps more properly internationalization, mean for universities? Usually, those talking and writing about global university are referring to the recruitment of students internationally. The markets tapped, for example, by the US, Australia, and the UK, and other European countries who are starting to provide higher education courses in English. And such entrepreneurial activity doesn't necessarily require the students to go to where the providers are based, of course, as Janet this morning offered the account of the transnational education, TNE. And some providers have extended their reach to new territories and set up branch campuses or partnered with universities in the host country to establish joint operations. And writers on international higher education also refer to research collaboration across borders, involving multinational research teams or partnerships between two or more research centers in different countries and so on. There is not sufficient, however, not sufficient attention given to academic mobility as a research subject. My research over the last 4 years has been specifically focusing on mobile academics like myself. So I use this biographic narrative research analysis and the ways in which mobility relates to internationalization, knowledge creation, and interculturality in higher education. We have seen the internationalization of higher education worldwide through mobility. And the OECD reports that in 1980, over 1 million students were enrolled at universities and colleges outside their country of origin. And 2 decades on, the figure had almost doubled. Less than a decade after that, it had tripled. The total number of foreign students worldwide is approximately 3 million. And there are 1.5 million of all foreign students studying in Europe, which is 50% of global market share. And 58% of these come from outside Europe, and 38% from inside Europe. Overall, foreign students' share of total enrollment is about 7% in Europe. When we look at the UK context, international students made up 13% of full-time first-degree students, and 68% of full-time taught postgraduates, and 50% of full-time research degree students in 2008 and 9. And with revenues of £25.4 billion, higher education is a significant industry in Britain, and it is comparable in size to printing and publishing, slightly larger than advertising, and much bigger than aircraft and space or pharmaceuticals. And some £2.9 billion of this money, which is more than 10% of university income, comes directly from international sources. Overall, international student recruitment is a big business for Britain, and Britain is a world leader in this. And second only to America, and all types of higher education institutions in Britain seem to be actively engaged in international marketing and recruitment. And the phenomenon is not confined to particularly elite universities. For instance, the former Luton University, now called the University of Bedfordshire, has a student body that is 30% international. As shown in this chart, regardless of ranks in the UK Higher Education League table, top-tier elite research universities or post-92 new universities or further education colleges, all of them are actively engaged in international marketing and recruitment of international students. But again, there is a stratification within the international markets. When we look at the proportion of international non-EU students enrollment in UK higher education, Russell Group universities are the obvious winner. But it is notable that some of the million-plus universities are also extremely successful in recruiting international students. And what is distinctive about the contemporary British universities in particular is that, first of all, it has a high proportion of international population, both students and staff. The UK student body has the second highest number of international students in the world. In addition to the huge influx of international students, the proportion of foreign and migrant academic staff in UK universities has increased significantly in recent years. 27% of full-time academic staff appointed in 2007 and 2008 came from outside the UK. But in some of the major research universities, the proportion is much higher. For instance, in the University of Oxford, more than 60% of academic appointments last year went to non-UK nationals. The proportion seems also higher at the professoriate level. And according to the unpublished survey data provided by Professor Ulrich Teichler in Kassel, Germany, he is a specialist in higher education data, a very well-known figure. 41% of UK university professors have foreign citizenship. And within the UK, the highest numbers of new appointments from the EU are Germany, Ireland, Italy, France, Greece, and Spain. And from outside the EU, the highest numbers of appointees are US, China, and India. Also, the number of Eastern Europeans and the countries of the former Soviet bloc are increasing, especially from Russia and Poland. On the basis of current trends, Universities UK has estimated that the overall proportion of international academics employed in British universities will rise to 50% in the next 15 years. This trend indicates that the British academic profession may well be in the process of denationalization. Overall, the increasingly diversified academic staff cohort in British universities adds to the already multicultural communities of practice in UK higher education. However, it is not yet clear to what extent the new forms and types of international academic mobility have led to the recognition and promotion of diverse academic cultures. And international academics may well be unfamiliar with the pedagogical, epistemological, and philosophical paradigms in which they are required to operate as lecturers and researchers. And they may not have experienced a student cohort who demonstrate a range of differing expectations of their tutors and who demonstrate attitudes to lead to learning and teaching and behavioral norms that they have never before encountered. And this is not just confined to the contemporary international mobile academics. Karl Popper, well-known figure, also wrote about obstacles he faced as an academic emigre in the UK in his biography as presented here. In spite of the language barrier and uprooting exile position, some of the emigre scholars found the intellectual contrast enriching, leading to a new knowledge creation. And another excellent example is found in Karl Mannheim's biography. As I mentioned, part of my research method is a biographic narrative research analysis, and I've been looking into the historical, specific historical period of the interwar period and the contemporary mobility. So contemporaneously, there is another anecdotal statement. Bridget Bonish-Bradney, who is a professor of anthropology in Victoria, New Zealand, who is originally from Germany, also offers a powerful analysis of her interstitial position as an academic migrant. She says, we become the other in both worlds, and as a result, we will always be reflexive about our place in academic environments. She also powerfully states that the cooperative performativity regime often creates another layer of culture shock to her as a German academic migrant. She says, "It is experienced as a deep intrusion into my academic identity. It is an imposition of another learning process in the entrepreneurial system of producing and selling knowledge. Resisting this often means a slow or sudden professional death." And despite the complex processes of intercultural learning for both staff and students, however, there is a tendency to hunker down and lay aside intercultural engagement in the process of internationalization of higher education. The presence of international academics is not seen as a major contribution to interculturality in British universities. They are seen as contributing to measurable research outputs of their higher education institutions. The internationalization of UK higher education has been led by economic interests in income generation rather than intercultural strategies. And more academics are mobile and becoming transnational, opting for international academic career development, as introduced in the morning session. A colleague who's been to Sri Lanka and Thailand, is all fascinating transnational academic experience we have gained over time, and it's becoming more and more common. And intellectual diaspora networks, however, build on social capital as well as human capital. However, the socio-professional networks of transnational academics and their embodied spatial knowledge are not yet seriously analyzed empirically. Is this a new academic profession? An academic profession in which all members are multilingual regardless of discipline, gender, age, region of origin, and so on? And transnational academic identities are being formed. At the moment, however, we cannot describe them systematically, even though we are beginning to understand the discourses of neoliberalism and the regional homogenization, which are invoked to increase their existence. Overall, the patterns of academic mobility overlap with and are constructed by the characteristics of contemporary neoliberal market-framed universities. There is a new division of academic labor. There is ever more severe competition for external research funding and international recruitment of research staff and also students. And in the neoliberal market-framed universities, we have seen the end of tenure and casualization of academic labor. Also, there has been new implementation of immigration policies favorable to highly skilled foreign knowledge workers. Both nation-states and corporations are in the worldwide market competition for brain power. Finally, neoliberal market-framed universities need new leadership for corporatist governance and management. It requires the conversion from academic leadership, which used to be primus inter pares, to managerial skills and competences in line management. The entrepreneurial management skills are now expected as transnational and transferable. Accordingly, some of the most prestigious universities in the UK have recruited vice-chancellors from abroad and from among corporate senior managers as well, as these pictures show. For example, in Oxford, Cambridge, St. Andrews, the Open University, the incumbent or previous vice-chancellors are all from abroad, notably from New Zealand, Australia, USA, and South Africa. In short, manager academics are emerging as a new type of mobile academics in the entrepreneurial universities. And this is especially visible in the English-speaking neoliberal market-driven economies. And alongside the international marketization of British higher education, the UK government wants more students to go to universities, even though it is not able to provide a commensurate increase in funding. Massification of higher education in the UK has been led by the widening participation in higher education policy to embrace diverse groups from non-traditional British backgrounds. And this coincided with a new push towards the new internationalization of British universities under neoliberal market-framed management and recruitment. And I would suggest that the students of working class minority ethnic backgrounds are the new Brits in mass higher education in the UK. And characteristically, many of them are very locally recruited and culturally insular, inward-looking, despite their immigrant family backgrounds. At least that's what I have found in my student cohort. For instance, many of the black and minority ethnic British students enrolled in Brunel University are from the local area, typically from Slough and Southall. And British students coming from middle class and traditional British cultural backgrounds are no longer insular, do not seem to be insular in particular, and do not seem to be immobile anymore. Many British students have become active in traveling abroad during the gap year. And given the introduction of higher tuition fees in England this year, some of them are likely to go abroad for higher education. Academic mobility is often regarded as a privilege of those who can afford to pay the cost. However, Von Vector, the director of the ACA, the Academic Cooperation Council based in Belgium, Brussels, once argued that if you are a poor student and cannot afford to pay the cost of your higher education, you need to become mobile, immediately leaving your country to find a cheaper option for higher education. That's what he argued. And he said that don't stay in your own national local boundaries. He himself, as a German, has been a mobile student, studied in the University of Hull in Britain, and worked in various countries in Europe, and now the director of APA in Brussels. So, however, in reality, many students from working class backgrounds tend to remain in their local boundaries rather than becoming international. Overall, there is a widening participation and widening gap in UK higher education, I would say, and the gap between the rich and the poor. It's not just a monetary term of the rich and the poor, it's things to do with the cultural capital as well. And against the background, the widening participation in higher education policy has been directly linked to the neoliberal marketization agenda. In launching the framework document, Higher Ambitions, the future of universities in a knowledge economy in 2009, Lord Mandelson said students as consumers needed to have far more information about courses and future employability. Nobody should be disadvantaged or penalized on the basis of the families that they come from or the schools they attended. The expansion, control, and finance of UK higher education has been led by the government. In summary, there is a massification of higher education that started relatively late, but it has been rapid in the UK for the last 20 years. And our former UK government set a target to increase participation in higher education towards the 50% of those domiciled in England and aged 18 to 30 by 2010. And currently 36% of young people enter higher education aged 18 or 19, making young people today over 20% more likely to go on to higher education than in the mid-1990s. As a consequence of widening participation in higher education policy, there is a visible disparity in the home student cohort in terms of age, social class, and ethnicity, with 17% of the BME nationally. The ultimate goal of widening participation in higher education is clearly stated in the HEFGI document. That is, participation in higher education will equip our citizens to operate productively within the global knowledge economy. In other words, the ongoing policy of widening participation in higher education has been led by economic imperative for a highly skilled workforce. At the same time, we are also seeing a widening gap among the universities in the UK and the complex lines of academic division, along with the nationality, ethnicity, and socioeconomic and cultural divisions within the higher education system. If you see this chart, the million-plus universities marked in orange have a much higher proportion of the BME students than the Russell group marked in blue and 94 group marked in pink. Alongside the ethnic groups, the class divisions is notable in the type of higher education enrollment. The percentage of young full-time first-degree entrants from national statistics, socio-economic classification classes 4, 5, 6, and 7 are concentrated in million plus guild, higher education, and alliance. It clearly indicates that only a small proportion of working class students enter Russell Group and 94 group universities, again marked in blue and pink respectively. What I can see as a domestic dilemma here is a perennial division in line with a social class ethnicity often embedded within meritocracy and choice and selection, which indicates a sign of ascription. Gilles Crozier and Diane Ree point out that what seems to have emerged in the process of widening participation in higher education in Britain is a polarized mass system of higher education. For instance, Alan Milburn's recent report on fair access to the professions, released in July last year, points out that there are more students of Black Caribbean origin at London Metropolitan University than at all the Russell Group universities combined. There is a greater tendency for working class students and those from minority ethnic groups to go to post-1992 universities, which tend to have more open access and encourage socially diverse applicants, and for middle-class students to attend the pre-1992 universities, which tend to towards more elitism. What appears to have emerged is a polarized mass system, and 92% students anticipate leaving university with debts nowadays, but poor students have 43% higher debts than the wealthier students. And it has been predicted that the current fiscal constraint and budget cut in the higher education sector will victimize the beneficiaries of the widening participation policy. With the introduction of the new higher tuition fees, outbound mobility will reflect this widening gap between the haves and have-nots, as mentioned earlier. And the UK government has closely controlled the supply of undergraduate places to British and EU students because it must lend money for fees. I mean, it wouldn't be the case from next academic year in particular. But it has been lending money for fees at subsidized rates to those who need it, as well as pay universities for taking them. An institution has to apply for permission to expand. So if permission is refused, its only way to grow is to recruit students from outside the EU. And that's exactly what has been happening. Just 7.1% more students overall were enrolled in higher education in 2008 than in 2004. But non-EU numbers increased by 23.7%. And there are other reasons besides the money grubbing to seek out foreign students. And they are often clever and hardworking. And another reason we can think of is that taking a big slug of students from other countries gives universities a more international flavor, enriching the mix and broadening the experience of British students in the process. That's the topic of our conference today. But in reality, to some extent, that seems to have been the theory. In fact, large groups of foreign students from a single country tend to stick together rather than blending in. And for instance, at the London School of Economics, where half of undergraduates and 80% of postgraduates are from abroad. Despite this diverse student body, there is a lack of intercultural experience. It is not even multiculturalism, but rather it is multi-monoculturalism, as the Economist reported last year. And my research over the last 4 years has been focusing on transnational academic mobility from a historical sociological perspective. And my research has made a critical inquiry of the complex triadic relations of academic mobility, internationalization, and interculturality in higher education. Especially in my paper published in the special issue of Intercultural Education, which I also edited. I analyzed the UK context in particular, where the internationalization of universities has been enmeshed with the marketization and commercialization of higher education. Overall, I argue that when we actually examine the triadic relationship in UK higher education, interculturality disappears, and the other two, academic mobility and internationalization, are enclosed by the market. At the same time, the widening participation policy and practice is producing new breeds as a separate entity in UK higher education. However, the Higher Education Academy report in 2008 covers the experience of international students and British students and academic staff, and does not distinguish international academic staff experience in British universities. And such a monolithic cultural understanding of internationalization experience has assumed a preeminent role in some of the official British policies. All in all, I think that we should look at the current gaps between the official policy for internationalization, actual institutional practice, and the experience of transnational mobile academic individuals, both students and staff in universities, and plus the experience of the BME, the minority students. I consider the BME students as the new local Brits in UK higher education, as I already mentioned, and they have immigration family backgrounds but have strong local British identities. And the reason that they are very local and inward-looking rather than engaged in global issues despite their immigration family backgrounds, I can think of that the legacy of the British Empire and the justification and defense of multiculturalism in Britain. Everyday life experience on any British university campus entails the boundaries of inclusion and exclusion that are discursively drawn and tacitly identified. In order to discuss that openly, I suggest that we need to practice narrative imagination invoking Martha Nussbaum, and to assume the position of a stranger invoking Georg Simmel, who wrote the Sociology of a Stranger as a German sociologist in the 19th century, 19th and the early 20th century. As we are all encountering strangers in one form or another, we all become a stranger on campus. And there are different stranger positions attached to the international academics and international students and the new Brits with minority backgrounds. In the age of migration, the proportion of immigrants in Europe is getting significant, especially in Spain, Germany, France, the UK, and Italy, as listed here. And there is a renewed emphasis on mobility as expressed in the Bologna Process 2020. Mobility shall be the hallmark of the European higher education area. It says in 2020, at least 20% of those graduating in the European higher education area should have had a study or training period abroad. Overall, this is a reminder of the still non-mobile majority. 80% are expected to be immobile in Europe. And this one, mobility-related disadvantages should be eliminated for all workers. This is particularly important for the research world. This statement reconfirms the European position advocating academic mobility. And academic mobility is key to innovation, to advancing the social acceptance of new knowledge, and to securing future economic success in the pragmatic terms. And accordingly, I think we have a project for the still immobile majority of students and staff in higher education in Europe, UK, and worldwide, which was initiated by a group of distinguished colleagues of mine in Sweden, France, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands with the aim of internationalization at home 11 years ago. And it has become a kind of set practice with this acronym IAH, Internationalization at Home, as a teaching and learning practice in higher education in Europe. In the British context, we don't necessarily use this IAH, but I can see that there is a concerted effort to to facilitate, to improve this intercultural learning and teaching experience in British universities, as indicated in Janet's data, that the student satisfaction, both home and international students, has dramatically, especially the international students' experience has much improved. And it is important to inculcate global narrative imagination and cosmopolitan identities among the immobile population, as they are bound to encounter mobile strangers, and their interactions will be inevitable on the day-to-day basis nowadays. Interculturality in everyday life experience requires more than the more and more active engagement with others in the multicultural environment. And students coming from the non-traditional roots as a part of widening participation in higher education often have studied more vocation-oriented subjects rather than liberal arts, such as history, literature, and foreign languages. For instance, none of my BA students studied history at school. So I think it would be important to make it compulsory for students to study liberal arts at universities, regardless of the subjects of their degree courses. British universities still maintain a traditional elitist approach by offering narrowly focused programs leading to this the first degree. But as British universities are running a mass higher education system now, which enrolls students who have not necessarily learned liberal arts at the secondary school level, I think it would be useful to provide a more wide variety of curriculum options for the first-year undergraduate students, as in the case of American universities. I would argue that intercultural education is naturally embedded in comparative approaches to studying arts and humanities and social sciences, and it is as important as subject knowledge in higher education to enrich life experience and enhance life chances. However, that may sound feeble as not instantly useful and applicable. And the strong policy drive to focus resources on strategic subjects like STEM and technical skills training for employability is understandable as a short-term pragmatic response to the higher education budget cut. And another dilemma is that the intercultural dialogues between home and international students, British students of immigrant backgrounds, are not necessarily interested in international intercultural dialogue. And there exists extreme diversity, further diversification, and polarization of cultures within. The biographies of distinctive mobile academics whose knowledge have become transnational also tell us that the whole set of mobility-related experiences, the initial act of crossing territorial boundaries, setting in an adaptation to a new academic milieu, are entwined with the process of epistemic transformation. Displacement is a common experience of most migrants, but for some academics, if not many, such experience has led to a new breakthrough and paradigm-shifting knowledge creation. Zygmunt Bauman, a Polish academic emigre and one of the most prominent academic intellectuals of our time, confirms his ontological position here. In Britain, I was an immigrant, a newcomer, not so long ago a refugee from a foreign country, an alien. I have since become a naturalized British citizen, but once a newcomer, can you ever stop being a newcomer? And Professor Anthony Leggett, the US-based British physicist and Nobel laureate, comments here, I definitely think that not just in science, but in any creative field of endeavor, it is an advantage to have been a minority, be it through religion, ethnicity, or even left-handedness. It is possible by assuming the position of a stranger, invoking Zimmel. Zimmel confirms that to be a stranger is naturally a very positive relation. His position within it is fundamentally affected by the fact that he does not belong in it initially, and that he brings qualities into it that are not and cannot be indigenous to it. And this refers to a cosmopolitan position, as Nussbaum commented as follows: each of us dwells in two communities, the local community of our birth and in the community of human argument and aspiration, in which we look neither to this corner nor to that, but measure the boundaries of our nation by the sun. Finally, I would like to offer two ways to think about interculturality in higher education. On the one hand, there is an instrumental functionary approach, which is important as well. I'm not denouncing it. Intercultural competence is a part of skills formation and training in higher education. It is infinite, isolable competences. It is expected to be acquired through codified knowledge-based courses, degree programs, and certificates. And given the increasingly global marketplace and world in which we live in, university students need to do more than acquire knowledge in their chosen academic or professional field. They must also be globally aware, culturally literate, and able to collaborate effectively across cultural, national, and linguistic boundaries. And on the other hand, and at the same time, and there is an existential approach to be adopted, in which interculturality is a process of gaining embodied encultured knowledge. It is a reflexive continuum, a journey to develop, acquire transnational identity capital, the concept I developed in my article published in the Discourse Journal. I wouldn't go over the details here because of the time limit. And it is a form of existential migration, exercising narrative imagination again, invoking new form. So thank you very much for listening, and your comments and questions. Thank you.